Let's now implement the first feature of our app, which is the ability to add new friends to the list. So let's come here to the form add friend component, which is where that is going to happen. So the first thing is that we need to get the value of these input fields into our application. So right here into this component. And how do we do that? Well, as we already know, we use controlled elements, where we will have one piece of state for each of the inputs, and then as the user types something here, that value here of the input field will be synced with that state. So let's do that, and let's write name and set name. And then, as always, we call our useState. And let's immediately do the same thing also for the image. And now all we have to do is to wire up these states to our input fields. And we have done this many times at this point, so this is hopefully nothing new for you. So again, we first define the state, then we set the value to that state, so basically controlling that input field, and then we listen to the change event with the onChange listener. And what we do is to take the event and then update the state using that event dot target dot value. All right. And let's see. That should already be working. Let's come here to the to the form itself, and then we should see the state down there. Well, somehow that doesn't really work. Let's try that again. And well, yeah, here it is. So that's the state, simply my name written wrong. But yeah, let's now do the same thing here in this other input field. So value, image, and then on change, e set image to e.target.value. All right, then we get some error here for some reason. So let's just reload. Get some more space here. And then we should, of course, see this state already in the component. And there it is. Nice. Now, actually here, I want some default already. So let me show you what exactly that is. So by default, we already want this part here of the image URL. So let's copy that. And then let's come down here. And so by default, this will be our image. And then when we actually create the new friend, we will add something to it in order to make it unique. But anyway, now the next step is here to listen for the onSubmit event. So again, just like we have been doing before. So this submit event will get fired whenever we submit the form by clicking there on that button or hitting enter while we are in one of these fields. And so then that submit event gets fired off, and then we call the function, which will be handle submit. So then let's create that function, handle submit. And remember that this function here gets called by React with the event object. And so then the first thing that we have to do is to prevent the default action, which would be to reload the entire page, which is not what we want in a single page application like we are building. And so the event handler function for a form, so on an onSubmit, always needs the event.preventDefault. And now let's create a new friend object so that we can then add that to our array. So that should have name, image, and the balance should start at 0, of course. So no one owes anyone anything. We also want an ID. And let's create the ID using the built-in browser crypto.random UUID. And so this is a very good way of generating random IDs right in the browser. So this is not an external packages, but it won't work in older browsers. But here we don't care about that. We just want to make this work. And so with this, we have a new friend. Let's log it to the console here for now, just to see that everything is working correctly. Give it a save. Let's reload here. And now in the console, we should see that object. And indeed, there it is. So balance. And here, I didn't call the function. I just passed in the function, which of course is not correct. Let's try that again. And now here it is. So this is the random ID that was generated. Here is the image and the name and the balance. Now, as I was saying, I actually want to now add something to this image. So to this string that we already have as a default. So let's create a template literal here. And so now I want to do equal and then the ID. Well, yeah, of course we cannot do that. So let's create this here outside as another variable. So const ID equals this, and then down here, just like this. So the way that this works, and the reason why we are adding this ID here, is that this string here, this URL, if we open it, it will basically give us a small image with the size of 48. But when we reload, it will each time give us a different image. But of course, we don't want that. So we want each image to be fixed basically to the person. And the way we can do that is to attach something here. So it doesn't matter what string, but now each time that we open this URL, we will always get the exact same image. So it will always be this one here. And as I reload, we should get exactly the same. Well, that didn't work actually, but maybe that's just because someone else has already used this. But yeah, this here should be pretty unique, and then we should always get the same image. Now there's just some small changes that we should do here. Of course not here, but here. So first, after we submit the form, then we should go back here to the defaults. So let's do that. So set the name back to empty and set the image back to, well, to just this here. Because of course the user could want to input some other URL here. It doesn't have to be this one. It's just the default that we're using so that we don't have to write this manually each time. So if we try this again, then you see that it gets empty. And here it should then also go back to the default. Now, if we submit this right now without anything, then of course something will still get logged to the console. So all of this here, all this code is still executed, but we actually don't want that. So let's add some guard clause here saying that if we have no name or we have no image, then return immediately. And so in this case, nothing is going to happen. So with this, nothing happens, but if we have a name, then of course the code works. Okay, so the form now works, but now comes the harder part. So how do we now actually get this object that we logged here onto our friends list? Well, let's think about it. So each time that we add a new friend, we want that friend immediately added here to the list. So to that UI right here. So we want something to happen in the UI, or in other words, we want the UI to render. And so once again, that's a clear sign that we need some state. So that is pretty clear, but now we need to figure out where to place that piece of state. And for that, let's take a look at our component tree here once again. Yeah, let's see all of it. So our friends list component here is the one that is going to display the friends, right? However, it is the form add friend where we want to update that list of friends because, well, of course, this is where we add a new friend. So the update happens here, but the state itself is needed here in this sibling component. So what does that sound like? Well, it sounds as though we have to lift the friends state up here into the app, right? Because this way, both of these components, or actually all of them, can get access to that friends state. So let's do that. And first of all, let's go to the friends list itself, where right now we have this friends here set to initial friends. And so now let's get rid of this part. And instead, let's create a lifted up state variable in the parent component, which is in this case just app. So friends and set friends and then use state. And what should the initial value be now? Well, not just an empty array, because we actually want these 3 friends here to be visible at the very beginning. I mean, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense for all the users to have these 3 friends, but let's just say that this is how it works. So let's just say that these friends are basically the default friends of everyone, because this is just a demo anyway. Now here then, of course, immediately get the problem that inside the friends list, friends is no longer defined. So we need to fix that by now passing in friends as a prop. So giving this component access to the state by passing it down as a prop. And so here we receive that, and then the component will be happy. So it's back to having this array, and then everything works again. Great. So that's one part. And now we need to give this form here the ability to add new friends. So to update that friends array. And we could do that in 2 ways. So we could directly pass the set friends function into the, where is it? Yeah, here. So right here into this form. But let's keep all the event handler functions right here. And so let's instead create a function called handle add friend. And then this function here will use that set friends function. And then we pass this one here down instead. Okay, so let's use set friends. And of course, this function here then needs to receive a friend object. So that's the new friend that we created down there in that component. And then here, all we do is to take the current friends, which again could be called anything here in this new function, and then we create a brand new array, spread the current friends in there, and add the new one at the end. So again, we do it like this, basically creating a brand new array instead of using like the push function, because that would mutate the original array. So it wouldn't create a new one, and so React in that case would not re-render. I mean, sometimes it might actually work, but it's not supposed to, because in many situations it will actually not work. So don't do that. Don't mutate original arrays, because React is all about immutability. That's also the reason why we are not allowed to mutate props. Remember that? So always creating new arrays here. And the way we do that for adding a new element to an array is by creating a brand new one like this, spreading all the current elements, and then adding the new one to the end, like this. So just like we have been doing. And now let's pass that in here. So on add friend, like this, we pass in handle add friend. So again, we are using this on prefix here, just like React does it for the events, like on click, on change, on mouse over. And so here we create our owns, basically like on add friend. So as if this was also an event. Okay, let's copy this. So this should already be working now. And so then let's come down here, pass that in, and instead of logging it to the console, we now want to call this function with the new friend. And this should now work, actually. So we have wired up everything correctly. So we have our shared state here, so our lifted up state, which is now available to the friends list. And we then update that state down here in this component. Well, not this one, but it's not in the tree, of course. Now it will be in the tree. So this was actually a good learning moment. So basically seeing that the component that was not in the UI is of course also not in the component tree here. Right? So now it is, but when I close it, you see that it disappears from here. Okay, but now it is back. And so again, this is where we will update the friend state and in a way do some child to parent communication. So the parent being the app component. And so then as soon as that state is updated, it's again passed down into the list, which will then re-render. So let's try. And there it is. You and Jonas are even. So this should now create some image there. It always takes some time for some reason. But yeah, that worked beautifully. And we can keep adding more and more. And then this updates the state exactly in the way that I have explained before. Here we update, then that propagates the update basically to the app component, which will then pass it down in the list, which will re-render as a result. Nice. There's just one small thing that we want to do, which is each time that we add a new friend, so that this form is submitted, we then want to immediately close that form, so make it disappear again. So that's easy enough, but let's think about it a little bit. So do you think that we should do that here? So in this component here, is this where we should close the form after we're done? Well, not really, because this part here, this form, is actually not responsible for showing itself or not. So as long as this component is actually included in the component tree, it will be visible. Right? So instead, who controls whether this component is visible or not is the app component by using this state. Right? And so we can use this handler function to not only set the new friend state, but also to hide the form again. So all we have to do is set show add friend and set that to false. So here the state doesn't depend on the previous state. So here we simply want to always set it to false. And yeah, we got the new friend and the form is hidden. And so this actually completes this feature. So just make sure that you take now a minute to review the code that we wrote here. So in particular, the lifting up state and how we then wired everything together. And then once that's done, we will start working on actually making this main part of the application work as well.